Go.
Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome back to the shop for another live, and we are going to be having a bit of fun today as we're going to be talking about hand planes. And I kind of want to use this as a Q&A focused on hand planes. I'm going to talk about a few things such as bevel up versus bevel down and going through some of the parts of the standard Bailey pattern plane. And we might talk about some of the other things. So if you have any questions about that, go ahead and throw those in the live chat. If you are not live, then you can look down in the description. I'm putting timestamps beside all of the questions. It'll get you pretty close to where they are in the video, so you can jump to the question you'd like to have answered. A couple things coming up this week. If you are near the Rockford area, we'll actually be having a garage sale on Friday, and I'm going to be selling a bunch of tools. Things that I have gotten over the years that I don't need. I'm not a collector of tools, so I've got quite a bit that I'm ready to get rid of, and we'll be giving that out. And I probably will be putting a few pictures up online, so if you are interested in buying those, let me know. Oh, and my wife got me this yesterday. Dad jokes. Warning, bad jokes happen to good dads. So if there's anyone with a super chat, I'll be reading out of the jokes in here. So there are several hundred that should last me for at least a couple lives.
I know, I kept it going. But we had a thing where we got $10 to spend however we want. And when I saw it, I said, if you don't get that, I don't know. I said you had to get it.
Yeah, there really isn't anything coming up other than, I actually, hopefully Saturday, and people have been asking me, when's the next bed video coming out? When's the next bed video coming out? Hopefully this Saturday, the next bed video will be coming out. As long as I've got a good bit of work I need to do tomorrow, and then a lot of editing to get that video together. This will be the last complicated video. After this, it should be pretty close. So be a bed video this week, not next week. And then hopefully 2 to 3 weeks after that, there'll be bed videos coming out every week until it's done. So I think there's like this one and 2 or 3 more depending upon how it comes out. So, yay! Finally getting that out.
It may eventually come out of the shop.
What's that?
I said it may eventually come out of the shop.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's me, but you just seem a little fuzzy. It could be my glasses.
I don't think I focused this one. Sorry about that. Here, I gotta aim it down and focus at the bench. Oh yeah, that's way out of focus. Let's try that right there. Set. Dink. There, now let's try that. Now I shouldn't be quite so fuzzy.
That's better. Glad it wasn't me.
Let's start this discussion off with a great argument. Bevel up versus bevel down. This is one of those arguments that recently within the last 10 years or so has become very aggressive. And so I wanted to talk about that. What's that?
Vigorous.
Very vigorous.
Sorry.
So I wanted to start off with that because this is what most of the comments and questions I get are, should I go with a bevel up or bevel down plane? And for those of you who don't know, it's often called a low angle plane that has the bevel up. So it's, if you imagine a chisel for a moment, and actually let's switch over to the other camera and show this a little bit closer. That'll make a little more sense. Oh, oops, I turned it off. Let's turn this back on.
Okay, I'll take over now.
The lines of death. Is it getting it now?
No. I guess you'll just have to lay on the bench and look up.
Oop. 2.
9.
A2. A1. Huh. For some reason, my feed is not working.
No say.
So.
I have a question when you
there we go.
have a second.
Why don't you do that while I'm getting this set up?
So Ravenspath asked, are you going to Amana Woodfest in Amana, Iowa in August?
No, I will not be able to go to that one. I would like to, but scheduling isn't going to work out. Every other year they also have handworks there, which is a lot of fun. But they aren't going to do that this year. So apparently, I don't know if Woodfest is like splitting out for that or what's up with that. If anyone has any information, that'd be fun to find out. But yes, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to that one, which is kind of sad because it's only like 3 hours away from me. Actually, it's more than that. It's like 4 hours away from me. But yeah. So let's look at the bevel up versus bevel down planes. So let's actually imagine for a second we have a chisel here with a bevel on it. A low angle plane has the bevel up, so you can actually lower the angle of the plane, and the distance from the floor, from the bed up to the angle is your cutting angle. With a bevel down plane, it flips around and the bevel goes down, but that means that the angle of the chisel has to go up in order to cut. Oh, Alan had to break in that new book. I'll get to a book here in just a moment. And this really freaks out a lot of people who aren't natural hand tool people. Is the idea of using a tool with the bevel down is very, it feels wrong. You should always feel, it feels like you should have it upright. Makes the forces in line with the chisel. But for a hand tool person, it often feels more comfortable to have the bevel down. And you'll see a lot more hand tool work done with bevel down, even with chisels and things like that. And so for a long time, bevel down planes were about all you could get other than block planes. No one really made them. Then Stanley came along with the 62, which was a low angle bevel up plane, sharpened to 25 degrees. And so what that allowed you to do is it got it a little bit lower and it put it in line with the force. And they sold it as a butcher block plane. And so this was a plane that they designed for, end grain butcher blocks. So you're cutting a lot of end grain. And the plane was fantastic for that. But it was basically the only reason it was made. It was for end grain, and there were a few other things, but that's what it was commonly made for. And so they were very rare because not too many people actually worked with that. Most woodworkers used these. Well, then hand tools disappeared and power tools came out. And then people started finding hand tools again. And the power tool mindset has the bevel up. That's just a fairly common feel to it. And so these make a lot more sense for the mindset of someone with power tools. It makes mental sense to have the bevel up plane. And so because of that, a lot of people really got into having that bevel up low angle plane. But the problem was there weren't a lot of these made. They were pretty rare. Stanley didn't make that many of them. And recently the price on these has gone through the roof. I mean, I've seen them upwards of $400 and $500 for some of the old ones. Now, that being said, both of these will do the same thing. And with a 25 degree angle in here, from the bed up to the bed angle, plus the angle of the bevel, you're going to end up with around a, let's see, 25 plus 12 is 37 degree cutting angle. Whereas this, because it's beveled down, it doesn't matter what the angle below. The only angle is at what angle do you put the iron, because you're using the flat side first. So if the iron is at 45 degrees, this is a 45 degree cutting angle. So a little bit steeper than this, which is great because this cuts end grain better, and that's what it was made to do. The problem with having it lower in angle is anytime you start getting into more figured grain, having a low angle causes more issue, or if you go against the grain, it has a tendency to get underneath the grain, lift it up, and split it out as opposed to slicing it off. Now you can fix that a little bit by closing the mouth up, but because the bevel is on the top side, you can't put a chip breaker on it. And so because of that, figured grains and difficult cross grain work, a bevel down plane has some drawbacks to it. But for general work, it feels really good because there's no vibration in it. It's pushing in line with the iron, and so it's a very simple thing to work with. Whereas with a bevel down plane, there's far more things to think about in this, but you can set that chip breaker really close to the end. You can close up the mouth, and with one of these, you can do a lot of figured wood. So it really is 6 of one, half dozen of the other. There's a lot of arguments that go back and forth one way or the other. I do tell beginners, if you come from a power tool world and you're wanting to start with something simple, then get a bevel down plane. And this is one of the Stanley Sweetheart planes. It's probably one of the cheapest on the market that's decent, and it's the one I use. And the nice thing about it is that there aren't a lot of parts in here, so it doesn't take a lot to figure out. And there's not the learning curve on this is much easier. Whereas the learning curve on a bevel down plane, there's a lot of things to think through, and the setup on these are very, very important. But that being said, this will do anything that the low angle will do, and the low angle will generally do anything that this will do. If you're going to be working with a lot of figured wood, then you're probably going to want a beveled down high angle plane. If you're going to be doing a lot of straight grain and you just want simple, easy work, then a low angle plane works really well for you. So I've opened up a can of worms going back and forth on this, and if you want to see more detail on this, I do have an entire video where I go into detail about bevel up versus bevel down plane. I think I actually have 2 or 3 videos on that. It's one of those topics that keeps coming up. So you got questions for me?
I have a couple.
Cool. Then first, before we do that, Alan got the first joke out of the Dad Jokes book. So thank you, Alan. And let's see what this is. I used to work at a calendar factory, but I got fired for taking a few days off.
I can't.
Okay, you get a second one.
No, I did it to myself. So
there was a robbery at the Apple store the other day. They caught the guy because they had an eyewitness.
I didn't hear the whole thing.
They had an eyewitness?
I didn't hear the whole thing. I got distracted by comments.
It was a robbery at an Apple store. They had an eyewitness.
We don't do Apple products.
So thank you, Alan.
I was thinking like literal apples, so that's why I was a little...
So what questions do we have?
So Woodworking Monkey asked, what about transitional planes?
Transitional planes. Yay. Transitional planes. Well, the big thing is you have wooden body planes, which I don't have one of those here. And for the longest time, wooden body planes were what you used. That was the only plane. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were other metal body planes that go all the way back into Roman times and before that. But wooden body planes were the common plane because the woodworker could make their own plane. They just had to have an iron to go in it. And so a wooden body plane was what carpenters knew. They knew how to use that. Well, then Stanley and a few others started coming out with steel planes. And these are far more forgiving. They last longer. They're easier to detail and learn. But functionally wise and finish wise, they really don't do that much. And so it's kind of hard for them to get people on board with it. And so they started making transitional planes, which were a wooden block but with all the functionality of a steel plane. And these are really nice because you get the feeling of the wood on the work. And the wood burnishing against the wood, it feels really, really good. And they're a lot of fun to work with, but they're basically the same functionality. I don't use them much because they tend to cost a little bit more in some places, although some places they are cheaper.
Yeah.
And so you got to kind of play that by ear. Uh-oh, Melody's here.
My pink bag has my retainer with a retainer cup inside it, and the car's outside.
We'll see if it's raining. If it's not raining, go out and get it.
If it is raining, we'll get it later, Melody.
Okay.
She just got braces, so
I love you.
We're having the fun of, where's the retainer? So transitional planes are functional. They work well. They're just not quite as common. A lot of people really like transitional planes, so it's more or less a personal choice between a transitional plane and a metal body plane. But the nice thing about these is you can make your own sole. So if you wear out, you can put a new one in there. What else we got?
Sorry, Beep Howard told a funny dad joke. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
A joke only becomes a dad joke after it is full grown.
Ooh, I like that one.
I thought you would. Oh.
It's raining just a little.
Well, it's up to you. If you want to go out and get... Is it lightning?
No lightning.
Then you can go get it. The severity scale.
The choices you have to make for your own kids.
Lightning? Maybe you shouldn't go outside.
What else we got?
Let's see. Brad's Workbench says, I just got a number 3 type 11, but the depth adjustment fork thing is broken. Has anyone been able to punch out the pinholes in it in order to replace it, or do I just need to look for a whole new frog?
When restoring hand planes, let me switch back over to this one. I generally don't do any of the riveted parts. And what he's talking about is down in here, you have, let me zoom that a little more. Focus. There we go. So down in here, he's got, grab something to point with. We've got a yoke. this metal piece that comes through here and sits on the other side of the screw. It's held in with a pin right here. And what you can do is get a punch and drive that pin out and replace the yoke and put a new yoke and pin in there. It's the same thing with the lateral adjuster here. There is a riveted piece on here. That's a little bit harder. That one you almost have to drill out. But then you have to rivet on a new piece. And so usually I don't mess with those. If the yoke is broken, I'm usually looking for a different plane. But depending on the plane, because it's very difficult to find a yoke. Most people are going to be selling the frog as a piece rather than just the yoke. And so most of the time, if I go to a Midwest tool collector's meet or something like that, I'm going to find someone who's selling a pile of frogs. And so I will find the frog. And for those who are wondering, the frog is this whole piece here. So the whole bed that the iron sits on, it's mounted in with several screws, and it has the yoke on there. Usually comes with a lateral adjuster as well. And so I'll find that whole assembly as one piece, and I'll buy those rather than just buying the yoke. And if you are looking for parts, go to handtoolfinder.com. There's a link for it down in the description below. And handtoolfinder.com is a collection of where I know of to buy hand tools. And there is a list of, I think, like 15 or so online dealers, and a lot of them also have parts. So you can go through that and see if you can find your parts for it. But for a Type 11, that's a really common one, so you should be able to find the entire frog on it. What else we got?
Hang on. Lots of questions. Hillbilly Buzz asked, what's the best way to sharpen if you don't have expensive stones or any stones?
The cheapest way initially is to sharpen with sandpaper. And so I will go and get well, depending upon the grit of what you're looking for, I may go all the way down to like 60 grit or even 30 grit to regrind something. But for average bench sharpening, I will get like a 200 grit, a 600 grit, a 1000 grit, and then I'll strop on a piece of leather. And that's a great way to do it. You just have to have it on a hard, smooth surface, so a piece of glass or something like that, and you can sharpen on that. That being said, you do wear out the sandpaper fairly quickly, and over time that does end up being far more expensive than buying decent plates. The next price up I usually go to is a decent two-sided whetstone, and I have links to one that I suggest on my website, woodbywright.com, and you can get one of those for $25-30, and they will do you pretty well. They're not great, and you have to spend a lot of time flattening them and things like that, and that's one of the reasons why I don't really like whetstones. But they're relatively cheap, so $25, and you'll have something that will last you for years. Then the next step up for me is diamonds, which you're going to be spending $50-60 a plate, but it is an investment well worth it because of the time that they're going to last, the time you save, the cleanliness, just the functionality of them. So it's really a thing of you get what you pay for. Cheap, you're going to be spending more time, and in the long run, you're going to be spending more money. And then there's the whole thing of what do you like to do, because some people are very picky about what they like. But yeah, that's my normal rant. What you got?
All right. George Ortiz asked, can you explain how the adjustable mouth of the front of the plane works, like the mechanics behind it?
Okay. Well, usually only the low-angle plane has an adjustable mouth. But I also have a Veritas custom plane, which also has an adjustable mouth. And it's a really, really simple feature. And basically, you can take the knob. Oh my, cranked that one down there last time. And you can unscrew the knob, and it's basically a bolt with a big wooden head on it. And underneath, there is a steel plate, which I can get out of here. Out! Wow, that one's in there. There we go. So I'm going to take it apart and show you how this works. So you've got this steel plate in here. Back it up a little bit. And this knob goes through into that steel plate and literally just moves this back and forth. Now you've got this lever adjuster here with a slot. So as I move it from one to the other, this will allow me to do more fine adjusting. As the bolt goes through there, it will slide the bolt forward and backward. But basically you just have this which is the front end of your sole that slides forward and backward. And so we can put this all back together, putting this in here, and this mouth, go in. This mouth can then slide forward and backward. So as I move this, lever side to side, you'll see it moves the knob forward and backward, except for this one. I haven't oiled this one in a while. And you can see how it moves it back. The thing is, you want the opening in your mouth, if you're working with really, really fine stuff, you want the opening in your mouth to be about 2 shavings large. If you're working with a scrub plane or something bigger, you want that mouth as big as you want, and as big as you can get. And so most of the time I'm going to set it to somewhere right around there, like, what is that, a 64th of an inch or so? That's a general average use opening on the mouth. So basically all it is a knob up here you can loosen and then slide the piece backward and forward and tighten it back down to its new location. Now on the custom plane it does the exact same thing, but there's also a knob on here, and this knob allows you to do some detail setting. So I can actually set this knob, and it's a screw that then runs into the front, stopping it so that the mouth can't slide back any farther. Because if I slide it back too far, then I'll hit the iron. And so this screw the screw acts as a stop so it can't come back any farther. So I hope that answers your question. What else we got?
Doug asks, when you restore your planes, when you store the planes you keep, do you use that blue on all of them? I take it blue is the family color.
If I restore and do a total strip down on a plane for my personal use, then yes, I do put the blue on there. And I get a lot of people who get really mad at me for putting the blue on there because I'm hurting the value of the plane. Well, it's my plane, and I'm going to do whatever I want to do with it because I'm going to be using it. It's my personal user. Now, if I'm restoring something for someone for historical sake, then I have jappening that I use, or a couple other methods, or I may not even touch the paint. I'll just try and clean it. And there's several different ways of doing that, so you can actually maintain the value of a collectible plane. But there's a big difference between a collectible plane and a Type 13 number 5 that you can pick up just about anywhere. So I do paint my users blue. But some of these, like these ones that are black, those ones are ones that I have restored, but I really haven't done much to them. I've cleaned them up and put them back into use. They came out of a functional state. The ones that are blue were basically rust buckets, with the exception of my 4.5. My 4.5 was in pretty good shape, but I wanted to play with the restoration on that one, so I did a total strip down on that. So if they're blue, that usually means that they were pitted and rusty, and to the point that most people wouldn't want to mess with them anymore. But I will take them and clean them up and make them use. And the blue is kind of my shop color, so yeah, makes me happy.
It's his favorite color, not just the shop color.
How did you know?
Royal blue, to be specific.
Yes.
All right. Let's see what's next. Alan Smith. Favorite choice, wood bottom or metal?
In general, metal, because it's more functional. In other words, I'm not going to spend my time flattening it and maintaining it. It's one less thing to think about. But there are times when I just want to really enjoy the wood, in which case then a wooden bottom feels so much better. Like the same thing with my spoke shaves. I've got a couple wooden ones that they work great, but if I use them too much, I'm going to wear through the sole and I'm going to have to make a new one. But when I really want to feel the wood and feel the vibration on there and how it comes through, the wooden sole on the work is just, it's one of those things that it feels really good. And so if you're wanting to have the experience and know exactly what is going on, then wooden soles are the way to go. But for general functionality and just getting a board to shape, a steel sole is just less things to think about. What else we got?
Yeah.
We got some questions.
Bill Tiffin asks, what is your opinion on a 4.5 versus 4 or 5.5 versus 5? Let's get into a whole topic on this one then. So we've got the number 8
And I got a number 2. I don't have a number 1 yet. I almost bought one a couple times. I was one for $600 at the last place I was at. And yeah, my wife probably would have yelled at me, but I didn't. So a Stanley number 8, which has a really, really long sole, and a Stanley number 2, which has a really, really short sole. Also wider and thinner. So the question is, why do you have so many planes when they're all functionally the same? They all have the same pieces and components, and they all work the same way. They all have the same angle on them. Why is the difference in length and size and width? And basically, the longer the plane is, the more it is going to ride over the valleys. So if I'm cutting a board, and the board has a high point and another high point, then it's going to sit on the high point here and sit on the high point here. And the mouth in the middle isn't going to cut anything. And that's exactly what you want. You want it to just cut the high points to bring it all down into a flat and true surface. So if I'm flattening a board and jointing a board, I want a longer plane. And the bigger the board is, the longer the plane I want, so it covers more area and flattens a larger area quicker. But that being said, when you're smoothing and you've done all the flattening and you're getting down to your final work, sometimes you want a smaller plane that will ride the undulations in the wood. And so you can just hit that one problem spot and just flatten, clean up that one area. Now, yes, in technicality, that does make a bit of a bowl there, but most of the time it's something that you can't even feel, you can never see. And if you go and look at a lot of old furniture and put straight edges on it, there'll be these weird undulations where someone grabbed a number 2 or something of that nature and smoothed out an area. And that's why it's called a smoothing plane. It's not a flattening or a jointing plane. And so the same thing then comes between the 4 and the 4.5, or the 5 and the 5 1/4. Is the 4.5 is about the same length. It's actually a little longer, but it's much wider. And so that allows you to cover more area quicker, but it also means that it sits on more surface. So it is going to flatten more of an area. So some people really like this for smoothing because it covers a large area fairly quickly. And some people say, no, the 4 is better because it's slightly smaller, and so it'll ride around those undulations more. And so some people, that's why they go with a number 2 or a number 3 for their final smoothing, is that it goes through far more undulation. In the end, it comes down to preference. I use the 4.5 a lot because this one is just one I like. Its handle is really comfortable to me, and the shape on it is, this one is just, it's a happy plane. It is exactly what I like, and so I have an attachment to it. So I use the 4.5 quite a bit. I probably use the 4.5 more than I use the 4, just because the 4 has a few things that are a little quirky. The last person glued the handle on askew, and it just doesn't feel quite as good. And so in the end, it comes down to a personal preference. There are no times where you really should use the 4.5 where you shouldn't use the 4. It's a personal preference. Some people really like to smooth with the 4.5. Some people really like to smooth with the 4. And other people say, no, you're daft, you've got to use a 3. Personal preference in the end. So, yeah. Hope that answers your question, but I probably didn't. Because it's one of those things that you really can't answer the question until you dive into it and you experience what you like or don't like.
You ready?
Yep, sorry.
Chris Whalen asks, I have a damaged smoothing plane. The bed has a crack just forward of the mouth, only on one side. Can this be repaired by brazing?
Yes, it can. That being said, be careful. Let me actually show you a couple that I have. Let's see. Yes. Okay. I've got my number 3, which I got for a deal because it was brazed. Let me switch over to 2. So here's my number 3, and you can see the brazing here where someone has restored it. And that's the most common place where it breaks, just right in front of the mouth here, cracks right there or up there. And this one was restored really well. The nice thing is they clamped it down to a steel surface, and they clamped the side in, and they locked it all in place and did the brazing and let it cool all locked in place. This one had a similar thing right here, where you can see the brazing put on here, but this one wasn't locked in. And this surface is no longer coplanar with this surface. This surface is actually tipped up at a slight angle. And so because of that, this plane is almost functionally worthless. I could spend the time to flatten it out, but I would have to take off so much material here that it would just be, I would really be wearing the sole fairly thin here. So I bought the 2 because it was a dirt cheap price and I'd like to hang it on the wall. But functionally, this really isn't a functional plane anymore because the brazing was done poorly on it. So yes, it can be done, but it takes a lot of skill, and you've got to make sure everything is locked in place and not going to move until it is completely cool. Yes, and you see those cracks all the time. It's very, very, very common. So good luck. I've never done it, and most of the time I'm too afraid to do it. I've done a lot of brazing in the past. I've done a lot of welding, but yeah, that's a scary thing. What else we got?
Let's see. Make Brooklyn asked, is there a frog in the transitional plane as well?
Yes, there is a frog in the transitional plane, just like there's a frog in my throat. Yeah. Oh, come on. I'll take this off and show you. So we've got here, there we go. So here I can see the exact same thing. It's just in this case, the frog is only half the distance down. And so on a normal plane, you could actually loosen these 2 screws and slide the frog forward and backward to close up the mouth. And that works out really well, but in this case, if you slide it forward, then there's nothing supporting the iron up here. So you have to make sure that this surface is perfectly in line with this surface down in here. Otherwise, you're going to be having a lot of chatter in your iron. So yes, there is a frog in the in a transitional plane, and it works just the same. 2 screws come out here, and you have the lateral adjuster, and the yoke on here. So same thing, just wooden. Is that another super chat?
It is, because SpaceCity Junk Removal really wants his question asked. He was probably like 3 down, but we're going to get to it right now.
Sergeant, the troops are revolting. Well, you're no prize pig yourself.
Oh, that was supposed to be a joke. I thought you were just talking.
Okay, fine.
Okay,
what does the dentist get on his 1-year work anniversary?
What?
A little plaque.
Anyways, back to his question.
Sorry.
I have pitting after removing rust on the front edge of my sole. It flattened out pretty good and it seems good, but flat still has pitting. No, it seems good and flat, but still has pitting. Do I need to sand it all off, or am I good?
You are perfectly fine. On a plane for general use, unless you're talking about a jointer or something that is going to be determining if things are flat. Generally, the only thing you need is the mouth, the toe, and the heel, those 3 points to be flat. The large spaces in between, as long as they're not crazy out of flat, really don't matter that much. Specifically on like a number 4 or smaller, you really don't need to worry about flattening everything perfectly smooth. And a little bit of pitting, not a problem in the least. You'll even see some old planes. Let me see. I think my number 6. Yeah, my number 6 is corrugated. And corrugated means that the sole has these ridges on it. And this was, Stanley advertised this as it gives it less friction and therefore it's easier to push on the wood, which is a load of hogwash. It doesn't make it easier to push at all. But it does make it easier to flatten because there's less problems with it. But some people really like this corrugation, and a lot of times the corrugation is actually costs more because it's more collectible. But again, all you need is it flat up here at the mouth, heel, and toe. The corrugation in there doesn't cause any issue, unless you're working on like really small boards. But pitting, no problem at all. And actually, I do know a couple people who like the pitting because it will hold wax longer. So if you wax the sole, it will hold the oil and wax in there a little bit longer and actually lubricate the plane. So it might be a benefit to you.
All right, so I'm just going to say this. If you haven't asked your question yet, I don't know that we're going to get to it. Because we still got a lot of questions, and it's already 8:38.
Ah.
So either you need to be more concise.
Or super chat.
Stop waxing
we'll
elephants.
jump to your question.
Or you could do the SpaceCity Junk Removal thing and super chat your question to the top. Just saying. All right, so I'm just going in order. Let's see. Caleb Kirkpatrick. Can you discuss the importance of frog adjustment / placement when setting up a plane? Did you already talk about that?
Yeah. Here. We actually do that in this one. Now, what you can do in here is I can change the camera over so you can see what I'm talking about. We have the frog in here, and there are 2 screws right in here, 1 and 2. And what those allow you to do is you can loosen them up just a little bit so you can actually slide the frog forward and backward. And as you slide the frog forward, it moves the iron closer to the front of the mouth. And that tightens up the mouth so you get a finer, cleaner cut. The smaller you can make your mouth, the more you can go over figured wood, anything with problems or going against the grain. So a small mouth is great for smoothing. But if you're doing large work like you would be doing with a number 5, a lot of times you want to back it up and open up that mouth, because the mouth gets too small and you're doing larger cuts, you're going to be clogging up here in the mouth. So being able to adjust the frog forward and backward is relatively useful. I don't do it that much because I have a 5 that I keep rough, I have a 4 that I keep medium, and I have a couple planes for smoothing. One of the other things you can do, let me see if I can show this, back in here there is a steel plate and another screw right down in here. And you can actually use that screw to adjust the frog forward and backward. So I'll loosen up these 2 screws on the frog just a little bit, and then I can get my screwdriver in here and I can turn that screw to move the frog backward and forward. There's a little yoke on either side of that screw that allows you to do that. And yeah, so if you're working with a smoothing plane, you want a really fine cut, close up that mouth and make it pretty darn tight. What I like to do is about 2 thicknesses of a shaving, 2 shaving thicknesses to close the mouth. But if it's a plane that's just getting the work done, then go ahead and back it off and leave that mouth a little large. And if it's a scrub plane, then make the mouth as big as you possibly can. I like having all these planes out here.
You're taking away question time.
Sorry. Shutting up.
Rich JG asked, have you ever had to secure a loose thread inside the frog?
Secure a loose thread. I don't know what you're asking.
Like a screw thread?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by secure a loose thread.
We'll say.
I'm guessing you're having a screw that is loose and just not staying tight. In which case then you probably have the wrong threads in there, because Stanley actually used to make, well, now you have quarter 20 and quarter 24. So quarter 20 is regular threads, quarter 24 is fine threads. And they used to have a quarter 22, which threads in a little ways, but doesn't thread in all the way. And that used to be a fairly common size, and a lot of the old Stanleys have quarter 22. Well, what happened was some people then went and tried and figured that quarter 20 just isn't threading down there. It must mean that there's threads jammed, and so they'd actually take a tap and tap the quarter 22 into a quarter 20, which just totally destroyed the threads. And so a quarter 20 then going down into that would just be loose and wiggly, in which case that's because you have bad threads. And I don't know of a really good way of fixing that. There are a bunch of putty products and things like that, but I don't. I haven't played with them enough to suggest one. So, yeah, I don't know.
All right, next question. So for those who are new to woodworking, Gary Joy wants to ask what a plane is used for.
A plane is used for taking off a thin shaving of wood, so a small amount of wood on a surface. And it is, a saw takes off a lot of wood and leaves you with something you can use. A plane takes off a small amount of wood and makes the wood that comes off pretty much worthless. And so it's kind of one of those things, a lot of times, do I cut this or do I plane it down to that? Sometimes planing is faster, but sometimes you want to save that wood and use it somewhere else. Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that one precisely, other than it takes off shavings of wood.
Smooth.
It is a jig for a chisel, as is every tool in the shop. Every tool is a jig for a chisel.
All right. Paul Chandler, I see some small nicks on the bottom of the frog on that plane. Does that matter? I think you were using the low angle plane.
Small nicks on the bottom of the frog. I haven't shown the bottom of any frog.
Huh?
But unless you're talking about small nicks on the bottom of a sole, no, not a problem at all. As long as the nick doesn't have like some barb sticking out that'll scratch the wood. It's one of those things that a lot of people worry about scratches on their new car. And especially if you go and buy a new plane and it comes looking absolutely gorgeous and pretty, it's not going to stay that way. It is going to get nicks and scratches. You don't think that wood will scratch the bottom of the steel plane, but yes, wood will scratch the bottom of the steel plane over time. There is silica and other things in there that will micro scratch it, and it's normal and completely the way things should be. So don't worry about scratches in the bottom of a sole.
All right. The Woodworking Monkey asks, when should one use a high angle frog?
All the time. I really only use a low angle plane when I'm doing end grain. That's what it's suited for, and it works really well there. But for a lot of other things, it's just a pain to work for me. But that's because I've gotten used to adjusting a regular Bailey pattern plane. Once you learn how to adjust one of these, they can do far more, far quicker than a low angle plane can. At least in my opinion. You'll have people who argue that one way or the other.
Okay, don't get into semantics. Answer the question. Daniel Meany asked, hi James, I am looking for a low angle jack. What are your recommendations?
Do not get an antique. They cost way too much, and you can actually buy a new Lee Nielsen for the same price or cheaper than an antique. The Stanley Sweetheart is like $125 and a phenomenal deal, actually. A lot of people kind of poo-poo it because it has an aluminum lever cap. There's a few things on here that feel kind of cheap. The handle's not quite. I mean, the handle's a little kind of crunky feeling. But functionally wise, it's a great plane, and it will treat you really well. They're functionally, I really like this, and I suggest it. Now, it is the cheaper one at $125. That's a pretty cheap plane. And so you do get what you pay for, but you're still going to get a decent one. I've also worked with the Wood River. Wood River makes one, and that's another great one. Works pretty well. If you're wanting to spend a little bit more and get something a little bit better, I generally say go with Veritas. You can go with the Lee Nielsen one, and it's basically a remake of the Stanley. And Veritas has put a few things into theirs that have basically, what I think, have taken it a step above what Stanley got to. So I much prefer the Veritas over the Lee Nielsen for me, but personal preference. But yeah, if money's an issue, the Stanley Sweetheart, that's the low angle that I use, and I really like it.
All right. Scott Swineford asked, your thoughts on changing a rather tired transition plane to a scrub plane? It's 15 inches.
Well, historically, when a wooden plane got the mouth too big and it became unserviceable, it was turned into the scrub plane, and then the old scrub plane was thrown away or turned into something else. And then they made a new regular plane. And so the same thing with a transitional plane. Now, the nice thing with a transitional plane is you could just replace the sole and build a taller sole that closes up the mouth a bit more. And usually when someone comes to me with a junk plane and they're like, well, what do I do with this? Turn it into a scrub plane. A scrub plane is the traditional way to use a plane that has passed its life and still be able to get a little bit more life out of it. So yes, turning it into a scrub plane is a great idea. If you don't have one, yeah. I like about the number 5 that makes for a really good scrub plane size. I'm not as big of a fan of using a number 4 as a scrub plane, but a lot of people out there really like using a number 4 as a scrub plane, so you never know until you try it out.
Brian Ross asks, "Hi James, I have 2 Stanley 5 planes. One has a smooth bottom and the other a corrugated bottom. Is one better to use over the other?"
Nope.
I think we kind of just talked
Use
about
whichever you prefer. The only downside to corrugated planes is if you're working on thin stock, that might catch in the corrugation. But functionally wise, 50-50, doesn't really matter.
All right. Caleb Kirkpatrick asks, okay, so this is a twofold question. Because
Got it.
Caleb Kirkpatrick asked, "Where do you get jappening?" And then our Tawney followed up with, "You have jappening? What is it? Can we see it?"
No, I don't have any jappening. Jappening is it's basically a paint that you can mix up yourself. It's a not varnish. It's basically like a thick varnish. It's a different. Oh, here's my best suggestion. Go to Hand Tool Rescue. He has another channel. He does. Well, he originally was doing like hand tool restoration, but he's also gotten into a lot of other things, and he's done some chainsaws and things like that as well. But he actually has a couple videos on jappening and making it, and he has several where he actually goes through and shows how to do it. Really good information on there. And usually whenever I make jappening, I go over to his channel and watch it and just follow what he does. But yeah, it's basically a paint, but it's not like a oil-based or water-based paint. It's a lacquer finish, so it's kind of a hybrid thing. Now, okay, that being said, also because I said that, I'm going to be getting a lot of people arguing with me that jappening is something completely different, or it is a heat-treated paint. And jappening through the years has been a lot of different things, and people have called a lot of different aspects jappening. And Stanley, even through the years of making planes, changed their jappening. So there's different things for different years, and some people get really picky about that. You have to use a particular recipe for a Type 6 and a different recipe for a Type 4, which I don't get that complicated in it. Yeah, go take a look at Hand Tool Rescue. He has a lot of information on jappening.
All right. Woodworking Monkey asks, "How long is a number 8? I have a transitional plane that is 30 inches long."
26 inches or 24 inches? 24 inches. Number 8, yeah, number 8.
Okay.
I don't know why I was thinking 26.
All right. Richie Cole asks, "How do I tell a bedrock plane from another plane?"
They say bedrock on them. Yeah, most of the time they say bedrock. The later ones, the first couple types, didn't. The side profile is exactly the same. On some of the later ones, rather than it being rounded across the top here, it's actually flat at the top, and so it comes up with a rounding and then goes flat and then comes down with a rounding. That's the most common way to spot a bedrock, but they have printed on them bedrock. And the big difference initially with bedrock was that the seat that the frog sits on was much larger, and it was a better connection between the frog and the body. That means you had less vibration. They've also added a few other things with a thicker sole and a few other bells and whistles throughout the years. And so a lot of people really love bedrocks. I don't actually have a bedrock. I've never gotten to that. I've played with them a few times, and yeah, they feel good. But functionally wise, it's really not. I don't see it being worth the expenditure to get one of those. Excuse me.
All right. Emmett Concannon asked, "I recently got a beautiful rosewood tote and knob for a number 4. I have 6 number 4s, and it doesn't fit any of them. Why is that?"
It's because they changed a lot throughout the years.
Yeah, and he says my number 4s are from different time periods.
Yeah, there are many different types, and they changed little bits here and there. And some people will say this is from a number 4 when it was actually from a number 5, and there are, yeah. I've seen a lot of bad advertisement that it comes from one or it's from another, and it could be, or it could be a different type, or excuse me. There are a lot of things that can go into that. So yeah, it's probably just the wrong type.
All right. Slightly different question.
Inhale
The
some
Real
sawdust.
Evora asks, what's your next project?
I don't know. Let me finish the bed first, and then we'll get on to that.
Maybe make Sarah a bench, or we could do it together.
What? A workbench?
A workbench.
You want a workbench? Maybe we'll do that.
You keep telling me you're going to make one, and then we never do. So
Yeah,
now you
let me-
have witnesses.
Let me get through the big project of the bed. And usually what I end up doing is I get through a big project, and then I take several months to half a year, and I do a bunch of small projects. And then I'll start into the next big project. So one at a time.
All right. Jack Beeson asked, how much camber do you suggest based on the size of the plane?
I do not put any camber on any of my irons at all other than the scrub plane. And I know there are a lot of people out there who put a camber on every plane and a different plane on each one. Then there's the Paul Sellers method of just hitting the corners of each one. I don't put any camber on any plane. And the next question that everyone then asks me is, how do you not get plane tracks? And because I don't take a deep enough cut to leave a plane track. When I'm smoothing, the cut that I'm taking is so thin that you can't see the edge of it. And even then, I'm often going to be usually the last thing to touch a plane. You touch a surface as a card scraper. So yeah, I don't have any problem with that. So no, I don't put any camber on any of my irons other than the scrub plane. Burn him at the post, I know.
All right. Jim Myers asks, I just picked up a 4.5 with a grooved bottom. What is the purpose of the grooves? By the way, I got the plane for $4. I think we've established that, haven't we?
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit earlier.
There.
Stanley had...
Reduce friction.
Well, let me just...
Oh, I was trying to get a fast answer.
oh, okay, then go on.
Okay.
Go back and watch earlier. We
Cut,
talked about corrugation.
cut twice. How thin is too thin for the sole after restoration?
How thin is too thin? If you're worrying about how thin your sole is, then you're worrying too much about how flat the sole is. You're going to see a lot of people out there who really tell you the sole has got to be dead flat within 0.010 of an inch anywhere on it. No, it does not. My number 5, the plane that I use every day, the jack plane, the one that is more, this plane is actually out of flat by well over 0.003 in the middle. It's considerably out of flat, but it does not cause the slightest bit of issue as long as it's flat at the heel, the mouth, and the toe, or the nose, the toe. And so if you are trying to grind something perfectly flat, you're barking up the wrong tree. Now, for my detail smoother, this is perfectly flat, but it's one that I've spent time on. For my jointer, I have 3 jointers, 6, 7, and 8. These are relatively flat, but that being said, from toe to heel, I'm probably out of flat by 1,000th or 2. But over such a length, who cares? No one's going to be able to feel or see, and it doesn't even make the slightest bit of difference in joinery, it being out of flat that far out. So flatness is not something to trace. But getting back to the question, how thin is too thin? I've actually never run into one that is too thin. Usually it causes other issues first. Yeah, I don't think I would take it any thinner than 1/8 of an inch. And depending upon the plane, that may even be too thin. So yeah, I don't know. I've never actually run into that and measured how thin a thin plane is because I don't spend too much time flattening a plane. A lot of people talk about taking an entire day to flatten a number 8. I flattened this in less than 20 minutes with sandpaper on my bench, and it's good to go.
Okay.
Getting caught up?
Yeah. I
have time
think
for
there's
one or two
several
more?
questions that we're not going to get to. Okay. Only wood. We're getting to your question. Do you like Japanese planes?
Yeah. Do I use them? No. Because I have enough other planes. One of these days I do want to get into Japanese woodworking, but I want to do it in a Japanese method. In other words, have the floor bench and doing all pole saws and pull planing. But that being said, if I want a wooden body plane, then I'm going to get a wooden body plane. I prefer the functionality and tweaking of a Western plane. That's just more enjoyable to me. But then again, it's a personal preference. So, does one cut better than the other? No. It all goes into the setup and how well the person behind the plane is working it. What else? One more?
One more. Zero Lock asked, do you ever have problems with the adjuster wheel on the Frog? Several of mine are worn, but I don't know how to repair them. And then he clarified with, I would appreciate any advice on repairing the wheel on the bottom of the adjuster lever.
Wheel on the bottom of the adjuster? Read that again.
Do you ever have problems with the adjuster wheel on the Frog?
I think you're talking about the lateral adjuster. There's a wheel on here. No. The only thing that could be is it being loose. And what you can actually do is peen it over a little bit more and tighten it down a bit. But I've only had that one time where that wheel was just so loose that it was causing issue. The wheel is there just to give it a little less friction as it moves back and forth. It doesn't actually have to roll. It just makes it a little bit easier to push the iron side to side. So, yeah, that's not a common thing. But if it's too loose, then you can peen it over with a ball peen hammer. Just be careful not to break the Frog, as it's a delicate delicate cast piece. So yeah. If I didn't get to your question, feel free to send me an email, and I will try to answer them there. Otherwise, we will probably be doing things like this fairly often. I think I'm going to be doing more a demonstration video and then like a question and answer like this every other week. So we'll flip it back and forth. So I think that's about it for this week. Anything I'm missing? Cool. So yeah, that is planes, and I could talk about this for hours and hours more, probably a couple days worth. There's a lot of things about them, even though they're such a simple tool. They're a lot of fun. So I think that's about it for today, and until next time, have a wonderful day.